You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy. And tonight, Roisin, we have a very, very fascinating and very special guest, Breeda Murphy.
We do indeed, Paul. As you know, when on my radio program, I used to talk an awful lot about the mother and baby homes, and we haven't really got the opportunity here since we started this week channel.
Cool.
Something that's very close to my heart, and following Breeda Murphy, who I'll introduce in a moment, for a long time on Twitter, and we've been talking about this. So I'm delighted to introduce Breeda Murphy. Breeda Murphy is an Irish woman with a conscience who is concerned for the vulnerable and victim survivors of institutions, abuse and mass graves. Breeda is also the PRO of the Tuam Mother and Baby Homes. Another string to Breeda Murphy's bow is she is a strong advocate for people living with disabilities. And Breeda, you are very, very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Thank you very much. That's lovely, Roisin.
And Breeda, Paul, we started off this year talking about women and children.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, we were looking at it from
I
a
think that it's
human trafficking point of view, but you know, Ireland has had its many problems this year in this area. And, it's not in the too recent past, unfortunately.
It has, and to me that stems from not learning from the past, because trafficking was one of the features of the mother and baby homes. The children were rooted between institutions, but also between jurisdictions, and that has not been covered adequately. For instance, you would have a mother in the south of Ireland go to Newry, perhaps in Northern Ireland, give birth to her child there. The child would then be routed to one of the adoption centres, like in Stanmullen, and from there adopted overseas to the United States. And that would involve three different sets of identity. So for one lady, Karen, with whom we did a broadcast at one point, Karen was a baby of the Newry Mother and Baby Home, and she herself will admit that the correct identity is possibly the very one she got from that home. But then on coming south, she had to have a passport. And of course, it again appeared she had been born here in the 26 counties. And then she was adopted to a family in the United States. And that is the identity that she lives by. And that is the only identity she knows. And I can fully understand that, while also acknowledging that it's a false identity. It's not her true heritage. And in many cases, DNA is the only avenue to provide one's true heritage, because records were either mislaid or never taken. For instance, there were cases, and they're documented in the illegal adoptions, in that documentary by RTE, and others have looked at it as well, including a state commissioned report, where a mother would arrive with a pillowcase under her dress, pretending to be pregnant. And she would walk out of a doctor's surgery with the baby in her arms. And the baby could be 2 hours, 2 days old, but that child took on that identity, that false identity. And there are many of those children, which brought me to the point this week of remarking on the Jubilee line in London, where the mother and baby home redress scheme is now open. There is a sign alerting people to that. And I said, for instance, many of the people who would have come from Tuam, which operated between 1925 and 1961, many of those mothers would not be travelling by public transport in the UK like that. They'd be in their 80s. And for the children from the institutions that closed at a much later period, including up to 2006, if these children are adopted illegally and don't know their heritage, they're going to look at that, read it, and say, oh, that's nice, or ignore it totally because it doesn't apply to them. So how do we reach the very people that are excluded? I think we should extend the mother and baby home scheme. The government admit or say that there are 58,000 living survivors. They would only admit 34,000 to the scheme. And the legislation passed through both Dáil and Seanad on that, meaning that there are only 34,000 acknowledged as survivors. The other 24,000, which the government say, now that figure is controversial because it's not correct, but the government admit to there being 24,000 that they are excluding. And it appears to be on the basis of money. These babies would have been there in the institution for less than 6 months. So if the child was there for 170 days, for instance, right next to a child who was there for 185, one will get full redress and acknowledgement of the forced separation from mother. The other child will get absolutely nothing, not even recognition of being in an institution. The children who are boarded out get absolutely nothing. The children who were subjected to vaccine trials, it's not acknowledged. Again, mixed race children who many times they were not seen to be adoptable. You know, the state reckoned that they should remain in institutions. And so even if a family wanted to adopt a child of mixed race, they couldn't. You know, I think it was Rosemary Adasser or Conrad who spoke about this. Conrad is with Mixed Race Irish, and he has done some brilliant research. And again, like James Sugru, a child who was boarded out, brought back from England, himself and his siblings, he is attempting to get justice and has talked to me about using every method, possibly having to go outside of Ireland. And that's the sad reality for people who have waited all of their lives for justice. And then you hear, it began with the Ryan Report 1999 to 2009, and we had the publication of that and the admission by state that these children were failed. And then it came to the Magdalene Laundries. And again, the government for a long time said it had no hand, act or part in those institutions until it was forced to acknowledge that it did have. And even then, it excluded some of the survivors where the Ombudsman stepped in. And now we have the homes. So how any TD in Dáil Éireann or senator coming from the communities we all come from, knowing people who were in the institutions, whether they were in religious service or working in the institutions or were a mother or a child. Many communities are devastated by this. We haven't addressed it. And the reason we haven't addressed it is because justice is not coming. And people so at this point will just throw their hands in the air and think, why should I expose what happened to me if the government come along and either lose my testimony or destroy it purposely destroy it and reconfigure it or decide what it says when in fact that's not true. So there were 8 judicial reviews taken on the publication of the Commission's report, and the government stepped in at last minute and admitted its failure on that. So now we're looking at redress being challenged in the courts. And again, that's an extra cost to the Exchequer. And once it sets a precedent, others will follow suit. They will qualify. They should qualify for redress. It is absolutely unbelievable that you can say, and unfortunately for him, the minister at the point indicated this. He did say, and it was, difficult to understand, that a child of 6 months would not recall. So by that same wording, he's suggesting that if the child is above 6 months, of course, they would recall. And our people have told us, Teresa O'Sullivan is a survivor of the Tuam mother and baby home, that what the mind has blocked out, the body remembers. So the trauma remains in her body. And she was earmarked for the United States because when she got her file, it contained photographs. So it was like a mail order business. You would get photographs of the children, you would pick the child, and she could see, the marks on her body where she had a rash. And ultimately, she was not fit for, she actually was hospitalized prior to being adopted. So they didn't send her to the United States. So there are many children that do not qualify, who are now adults, who are in their 80s. We are losing them. They are dying without ever seeing justice. And I think it's the false promise that we had from, the government under Leo Varadkar, Micheál Martin, Eamon Ryan and Roderick O'Gorman. We had that indication, Catherine Sapone too, that they would deliver. And, they pull the rug from under people. So really, we've lost faith in the Irish government providing any form of proper redress to people who are now elderly and have waited all of their lives.
You muted yourself there, Roisin.
Apologies, my internet is going.
Okay, now in 2 seconds. I get hold.
The
Yeah,
Irish
you're back.
government, especially with the Green Party, and as you said, Roger O'Gorman, Eamon Ryan, that there has been one politician who has been steadfast in talking about the baby in homes, and that was Deputy Kathleen Function, who's now an MEP. And she's assured me this afternoon that she's going to keep talking about the mother and baby homes. Do you see any hope going forward maybe in the next government or in any other politicians, Breeda, in actually calling for justice?
I don't see it. I don't see it happen, because when you think about it, we've had 10 years.
Yeah.
For the last 10 years, and we've had, it will be literally the same government formation, more or less. And I don't see them change. Roderick O'Gorman did not come along and say we're excluding 24,000 without it being approved by Cabinet. So he came to us with approval of the entire Cabinet. So they sat around a table and discussed this as if the child was not a child of this state, that they really had no responsibility for. And of course, not only was it a child of this state, it was a child of subjected to the rule of their parties, of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And they've had the opportunity more than once to fully redress and address this from a human rights perspective. I mean, everybody can't be wrong. The Irish Human Authority, Civil Liberties, the Ombudsman for Children. There are many international observers, including psychologists, psychiatrists, who look at child psychology and how development is thwarted by early life experience. And very early life, within the first few months of birth, and the bonding with the child. And, not alone did Kathleen Function. I mean, we've lost some really, really good TDs in Dáil Éireann. Sean Sherlock, who was is a father rather of a very young child at the time he was speaking. He was mindful of the fact, and he spoke about this in Dáil Éireann, of the fact that any investment he had or he was putting into his child, the government were indicating didn't matter. The child would grow up anyway without needing the parents' love and attention and comfort and nurturing. Catherine Connolly said the same thing. You know, you're basically dismissing the love I've shown to my children and the way that I've reared them. And you're saying this means nothing. Yet today, you come out with, you know, children first, all the different pieces of legislation that say, you know, a child warrants care and nutrition and nurturing from the very start. So what's different 80 odd years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago? How can you say it matters today and they did not matter? And I think for me, the most upsetting thing, and you know, when you meet with survivors, because they're so used to having the door slammed on their face, they have a certain resignation, you know, that this is what's happening all over again. The ones who will stand up are possibly the ones who are much younger and who are maybe not afraid to speak anymore, because the older one gets and the more frustrated you become with banging your head against a brick wall, looking for justice in the same place all the time. I mean, that's why interesting that, and it's good for us in one way, even though I was sad to see her leave, that Kathleen Funchion is now in the European Parliament with Luke Ming Flanagan, for instance, because Luke Ming cares about human rights as well. And I think that's where we need to go. We need to go to outside of Ireland to look again for justice. But it doesn't matter what the UN Special Rapporteur will say. Like, the Irish government have various kind of strategies that pretend they're speaking to us. For instance, very recently, they held an engagement process, they called it, with survivors of all institutions. So we're talking about the mother and baby homes, the Magdalene Laundries, the industrial schools, the orphanages, the reformatory schools. So literally all institutions except for the psychiatric asylums. So they invited us to, and this is still ongoing, to a session, and we attended in Galway here in the Ardham Hotel. So one of the most upsetting parts for me is that we go into this with, you know, eyes fully open, but hoping and understanding that this is going to be person-centered. It's going to place survivors first. It's not going to be led by suits from government. And that's exactly what it was. It literally was presentations by those who are involved in the museum or the what is in Sean McDermott Street, the last Magdalene Laundry to close in 1998. That will be a museum and a centre of remembrance. But all of the work that was done to date has been without the voice of the survivor. And at late stage, they took in their special advocate, the one appointed by government, not appointed by survivors, appointed by government. She herself is a survivor, but she has been a civil servant for many years and worked with government. And she represents the voices of a survivor, mother and baby home. There is nobody representing the voice of the industrial school survivor, and there is nobody representing the Magdalene Laundry survivor and or the orphanage. And what came across was that there were no questions and answers. There was no time afforded to us to ask questions, which made a mockery of bringing us there with the expectation that we could ask questions in real time, get real answers, rather than have what appeared like a talking to us, you know, a dictator type of thing before, you know, people saying we are the professionals and we will tell you without involving you, and like it, lump it or leave it. And I was really, really sad, because It's 2024. My MA is in public advocacy and activism. And I've always stood, if not right beside the survivor, behind the survivor, because their voice matters. And they are the one, the experience that I really cannot understand how very difficult. I mean, I've heard the stories and they were recounted again at the table. We sat at various tables, various people were represented, including the National Archive. But to me, it seemed too little, too late, even the involvement of one advocate at a very late time. And this was all orchestrated, like it was developed and devised by the interdepartmental committees. And that is unfortunate because that does not take any account, which is why the region being failed. That had no survivor voice. It had nobody from any institution. It involved them, but it also neglected to adopt or adapt to the testimony and take those on board of survivors of all of the institutions. And I think until there is respect for the survivor first, we will be running around, doing the same thing all over again. And I'd still be sitting here in 10 years' time. Like, I don't want to be here giving out about government. I really do not want to be here doing it. But I see so few. And there is a real understanding, I think, outside of Ireland on this, because documentary makers are constantly contacting me, and they're the ones who will, I mean, they're astonished. Oprah Winfrey recently had Claire Keegan last week, I think, on the book show that she's just started talking to authors of books as to why they came around. And Oprah was talking then to Maureen O'Sullivan, who was a child of the Magdalene Laundries, not just an adult. She was Magdalene Laundries, a child, and placed there. And she's written a book about that, The Girl in the Tunnel. And so Oprah hadn't heard about it, but you can imagine the audience Oprah can reach. So this internationally is reaching new audiences all the time. And what is surprising to them is that we are known as a people to have certain rights and rituals, particularly in relation to death. And then we see that 796 children are disposed the way that they were without burial. And we see that according to the Commission's report, there are 9,000 children deceased from the institutions investigated. That figure, it can be multiplied many times. We do not know, and that's part of the problem. We haven't access to the records that the Commission had access to. We don't have access to the religious institutions records. We don't have records from the diocesan offices. We don't have GlaxoSmithKline's unredacted records. And we really have the state's records. I mean, we are asked to believe this is all that is there, but time and again, records have shown up. Then for that industrial school, the young boy who was there was asked to dispose of them, to burn them, in fact. And he was then employed there. He was a child of the institution, and he asked if he could retain some. And his own mother had in there. He had never received that. And so he retained various records with the permission of the superior. But of course, once they realized he had them, they wanted them back. And again, for the Donnybrook, the laundry, that the records on its sale were found that showed that it made a profit, while the McAleese report indicated that it was a break-even enterprise. But of course, anybody knows, and particularly those in the laundry industry at that time, that they had to pay wages, and the laundries did not. So there were profits made, and I think we need to be honest about that.
And Breeda, when you questioned the interdepartmental group that you were speaking to recently, when obviously I'm sure you said many people in the room had big concerns and issues with the whole process. What was their answer, or what was their response?
I wasn't allowed to ask a question. Trisha Carey was the MC, and she had indicated there would be no questions. So I put my hand up, and I did ask one question. There was Mary Harney, who's a survivor of industrial school Magdalene Laundries. Mary Harney is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and is one of the ladies who took a case against the Commission's report. She indicated what she thought in the very beginning. But I mean, if you come to anybody, any meeting, anywhere, you know, community meeting, any engagement session, and it's called engagement, you don't talk down to people and then not allow them ask the questions. So they really hear. Now, I did contact them afterwards. I mean, I do think that we need to be honest about this. What surprised me about it was that it was held previously in Dublin, and I didn't get the feedback from that. You know, we don't get feedback, and that's one of the breakdowns in communication. I think had I gone into it knowing there were no questions, I don't think I'd have gone. I think I would have said, you know, but then again, you have to go and you have to learn and you have to expose. And really, that's my point, is that many people would see that as the government be reaching out as the interdepartmental committee, but they wouldn't call them the interdepartmental committee. So when this comes before the UN Special Rapporteur or any UN human rights agency or European Parliament, the government will say, oh yes, we held consultation around the country, and we need to be there to say this is exactly what you held, and you did not listen to the voices, and you admit that 24,000 are excluded from redress, but we know that that only includes the institutions that the state itself invested. It does not include the other homes from where children were adopted, and they cannot illegally adopted, and they cannot find their way back. And one of them was my family member, and he was 90 years of age when he passed away earlier this year in March. He was 88 when we were able to give him his history, going back the best part of 100 years. But for 88 years, David didn't know who he was. And he showed up on my DNA. And his daughter said, how do you know, what is your relationship with my dad? How are you related to him? And I said, I can tell you I'm not, because the name is not familiar on my mom's side or my dad's side. So related. And it transpired that David was born to a Catholic mother who was related to my mom, and a Protestant father. And of course, in 1933, that was not allowed. And she gave birth in Dublin, and David was subsequently with the Sisters of Mercy. They held no files whatsoever, but Wicklow County Council held the files, and under either name, Wicklow County Council were able to recover information for us. And so we were able to build a picture of David's early life, what he didn't remember because he was too young to remember. But the one thing he had was he knew his mother loved him. He knew his mother searched for him in vain, came back from England year on year. His date of birth was also changed. So even if you were to do a search under date of birth, and you can imagine you're trying this in 1935, 36, 37, you know, and you can't find him because date of birth and name change, you are never going to find him. Only DNA would find him. So that's reality, is that people are dying thinking they were, and that he was wanted. He was christened Bree's dad, same name, both had the same person. They never met in their lifetime. It's amazing ethics, how one looks like family. But for them, David, and for it was really important to them to know their history, know it was very much and loved. 80 years is how many lifetimes? And there were ample opportunities for the government at this prior to us trying. When religious have records, we have to accept that. We don't have any search facility to go through records. And I think that is a real mistake, because all of the institutions were funded forefathers by the tax. And so all of those monies, we have incomplete records with regard to the money paid. We should be to recover absolutely everything, because that is out there. And I do it for free. There are many retirees like me who would only relish the fact to be able to look through the files, to be able to draw conclusions by having proper information, by giving that information to the people who matter, to the survivors, to the families, to the loved ones who have lost a family member in an institution. Yeah.
To me, it was child trafficking and exploitation of women and children, human trafficking, and from day one. And it was a state legal selling of.
Yeah, that's
when you think
exactly
about
what
it.
you call it.
Yeah, and when you think about it, that we're still here in Ireland in 2020, we were tier 2 of the child trafficking world watch list. Nothing has changed in Ireland when you think of it, when it comes to babies and children.
No, and when as well that any said we sold them, we gifted them, we trafficked them, we starved them, said that of the children. So that is an admission. And yet they deny children were adopted overseas. The state were involved because they had to have the passport. The church were involved because in many cases, including in my own parish, the parish priest drove to the airport, Shannon Airport, with young girls, young teenage girls who weren't the mothers, who were parishioners, sitting in the back with a child on their lap. And those children were handed over, and we know from air hostesses that they were the ones who oversaw the children, or somebody on the plane took care of the children who was just going across, and it's human trafficking, but it was trafficking at a price.
Yeah.
Money's changed hands, and the price for some, like there's a lady called Colleen who was born in Shanross Abbey, and Sister Hildegard was the nun in charge, and so she was adopted to the States. She now lives here in Dublin. She has spoken extensively. She did not have a happy childhood. It was anything but. And we have Michael from our own group, Michael Byrne, who was adopted to the United States. His mother kept all of the records, including the very outfit he wore on his trip to the United States. So she kept all of the records. And then you've others who tell us that the amount paid by way of donation, it wasn't a fee, it was actually a donation to the religious order. But the amount paid was the equivalent to the salary of the breadwinner of that home. The annual salary, the wages for 1 year So that, if you equate that today, that is a significant amount of money.
Millions.
Breeda, where do you see this going now in 2025? Where do you see it? Where it is now? And what are your expectations, if any, for 2025?
Well, I know from Daniel McSweeney that the excavation works will begin the early new year, within the first 4 months or so, in June, already doing preliminary works. My fear as an archaeologist is that, and Niamh McCullough has cited this to government during the test excavation of 2017 and 2016. She was in there at the end of 16 and early 17, doing the test excavation, was that if the government did not allow for excavation within the 6-month period of her closing the site, they could not guarantee that DNA would be available or salvageable after that period, because that was the golden opportunity. So really, when you think about it, we're 7 years on. So we're multiples of that. And we all know, I mean, everybody knows, you don't have to be an archaeologist to know that when you go below ground and you expose anything to the elements, the deterioration can begin pretty, without it being so secured again. You can never really, the ground is always moving, shaping anyway. A grave never settles, is what is said. But because they didn't go in within the first year and have waited so long, and that was purposely done, in my opinion, I fear that DNA will be lost to the families that are waiting. And so what you will have will be a recovery. And of course, there's absolutely no talk of inquests whatsoever. That's not really talked about. If foul play is suspected, they will say yes. But I mean, again, and there are brilliant people involved in this work. The government of the day, the Minister for Children, cannot step back from this. Whoever is appointed will be involved. And we are still pushing. Tuam is just one site. There are 859 children missing from Bessborough for a much later period. And yet the state will not intervene, even to find where the mass graves are and to secure them so that no building work is carried out. And the same for Shanross Abbey. Really, the state was pushed to do this by the brilliant work of Catherine Corliss. Without that, it would not be doing any excavation work. But that work will go on, I would think, throughout 2025, 26. There will be a lab on site, and we will be informed and, in fact, invited to the site on occasion. So that's in relation to the burials bill and the excavation work. In relation to redress for the excluded, the government will kick that can down the road. It will look at that again, I think. In fact, it has never looked at the psychiatric institutions. And we know that trafficking took place between, for instance, the mother and baby home, the Magdalene Laundry, the orphanage, the county home, the reformatory school, and ultimately, and in fact, the women of the Magdalene were often threatened with a psychiatric institution. And the women left Tuam for a psychiatric institution. But the state has never looked at them. And when you ask yourself why, you realize there has been no third party involved here. It is purely run by state, and for a much longer period, and much more recent period. Like, survivors are alive and will be able to challenge with help from the legal profession. So I think that the government will just kick our can down the road and say, oh, we have the book closed on this. And it's only when they're hauled over the coals by the international community that, again, they will send in their own advisors to say, this, we've done this. It's all tick boxing. So I want to be the other end to say, what have you achieved by that? I mean, you know, we've met with Catherine Sapone on many occasions with Roderick O'Gorman, and they know, you know, nobody can convince me that they didn't know what they were doing. They're part and parcel of the blockage in many ways. And, you know, I would have much greater respect for anybody in Dáil Éireann who would have gone against the party whip and said, I'm voting with conscience, because we attended Leinster House with, for instance, Anne Rabbitte, and she shed tears on hearing stories. And at the same time was saying the children of Tuam should remain in the ground and money should be spent today. This was 2019, of course, on the children of today. So following that, again, it's a bit like Roderick O'Gorman. What's my view? Roderick O'Gorman did not operate in isolation. And I believe that Anne Rabbitte knew what she was saying to the Business Post on that Sunday when it was reported, because they didn't retract it and she didn't challenge it. And ultimately, she won a junior ministerial role. So many times the water is tested by government in that way. Somebody close to the issue, and she was TD for the area, for the Tuam area. It's in her catchment area. And of course, she's lost her seat recently.
Yeah.
She will be in Shanadéran. But I really think that nothing happens without the cabinet approving. And they have approved the interdepartmental committee. It's been a, you know, to and fro between the interdepartmental executives, secretaries of departments, for instance, and government, so that they all play ball. And the people who are excluded are the very people that they say are central to this entire commission. You know, survivors to not get a copy of their testimony flies in the face of centred manner of engagement to take testimonies. I mean, nobody does that. Absolutely nobody does that, except a dictatorship that says, this is what you said. And of course, you have to then dispute it or leaks it to the press, even worse again, in January of 2021, and then appoints the Secretary General to the Taoiseach to find out who leaked it. And on that Sunday that it was leaked, that Sunday Independent with Jodie Corcoran, we got an email from the minister, from Roderick O'Gorman, by about 11 o'clock in the morning, to say that this would be fully investigated, the leaking, and that he was very disappointed and upset and angry at it. And 9 months, 10 months later, we found out that indeed there was going to be no investigation, because the Secretary General of the department, Martin Fraser, said that he could not establish who leaked it. So you have to ask yourself, you know, how many members are of cabinet? How many people really knew what was in the Commission's report? How many read it? And if you have 9, 10, 11 months to investigate that, and you don't do so, then I'm afraid I think you are part of the problem as well. So for that, Martin Fraser was actually appointed as ambassador to the UK and now sits in London.
So it looks like
Yeah.
shot and you get political promotion. I mean, it's like selling your soul. But some people might say that it's like selling your soul for it's corruption. I mean, to stay quiet, say nothing,
Yeah.
where there's innocent children, mothers, babies, families, human trafficking, baby trafficking, human trafficking, all at play.
Yeah, and I said that to I was on Galway Bay FM at one stage with Keith Finnegan, and I indicated to him that because we'd been in Dáil Éireann on a number of occasions to see the voting take place or to witness to and fro, and I'd said to him that, for instance, Anne Rabbitte could have chosen to take the side of the people she listened to. And so she would say to her party, I'm sorry, I can't do this, so could anybody else. But none of them did that. None of them did that. And I remember Keith Finnegan, who's now retired. Well, he does some shows, but he did the Galway show, the Galway Talks show for many years, and was brilliant. He said, "Oh, Breeda, you cannot say that." And I said, "Of course I can." I mean, when you look at it, Dennis Naughton sided his people. He lost the party whip, but he remained an independent. And he was voted in time and again. And of all the people since 1999, 2000, who is an authority, and in fact, if he would speak to you, it would be brilliant, on the vaccine trials, because some of the accounts and the transcripts from Dáil Éireann, courtesy of him, with great gratitude from us, relate the story of the vaccine trials, where he called the children, he said they were guinea pigs. They were literally lab rats. So when you hear that and see that in Dáil transcript, that can never be changed. He has been a wonderful advocate on that, and he has done tremendous research himself. So he's a loss to us, to those of us who still fight. There are still some good people. Catherine Connolly has asked many, many questions for us. There are some in Sinn Féin. Thomas Pringle, likewise. Thomas is now gone. But we will continue to seek out the channels that will allow for parliamentary questions, because those are documented, and the press, unfortunately, are very fickle. And if there's some story in the news, they're all ringing. Everybody wants to talk to you at the same time. The following morning at 9 o'clock, everybody wants you. And as I often say, nobody wants to speak to us afterwards, because it's presumed, or whether they take the word of government or not, that this is a closed book. It's not. I mean, if somebody said to me 10 years ago that we would still be here, I would have said, you're mad, because I went in naively thinking, Eamon Ryan, Micheál Martin, despite his many years, decades in Dáil Éireann, doesn't understand. I thought, they just need to meet with survivors, to understand, to listen to them the same way as I did, to be taken by their account, to know that they're not lying, to know that we have limited opportunity to provide justice within their lifetime. And so I was pretty assured in my own mind that this would all come to fruition within 3 years or so. And I was willing to devote 3 years to it. But 10 years on, I mean, it's demoralizing. It is like, when you ask me, where do we go next? I think the only place to go is, again, to try and expose it through various documentaries that will win and will get the audience, like the United States. Many in the audience have never heard of documentaries, had never known of their association with Ireland. And yet the amount of Irish people, with Irish heritage in the United States who did not know this, is like staggering, really, when you think it has been all over our media for the last 10 years. And the brilliant pieces that have been in the New York Post by Dan Barry, who has written extensively. And again, his mother came from Ireland, so he has a unique style of writing. And Liam Neeson is doing the movie. So, there people I would have thought would have known but there's so much abuse in the world, and so maybe these days we're all busy with our own lives, and we're caught up in so many things. And I think that particularly for the Irish people, you know, I would have preferred had we had 80% of our people go to the polls. I would like more young people involved in politics. I think because housing is such a big issue, and because while they feel neglected, young people changed much for us. They're the ones with the social media skills, and they did come back in their droves to help us when the government were going to put away all records for 75 years. So the young people of Ireland at home and abroad supported us on that, and the Dáil internet system crashed. Such was the advocacy that came from that. In fact, if you had a keyword in the email in the subject line, it likely went to spam. So now when I write my emails, I like to put in something that won't go to spam. Do you know what I mean? To make it a little bit more personal, maybe, or try and hook the audience who are the politicians. Many times now I do not bother writing to government. I have to write to the opposition to ask the parliamentary questions for us, and preferably ask it within Parliament rather than it's exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Breeda, for there to be a radical change in the government's position, what do you think would need to happen? Was a ruling from, I say, European Court on Human Rights, or something of that nature? Do you think that's the only way that we could see the whole a big shift in government policy on mother and baby homes?
Well, I think the government, the first in the revolution, you know, and when Catherine Sapone and the Commission of Investigation called for a test excavation there, they thought that the graves there were famine graves. This was circulated time and again, and I remember Catherine Sapone saying that shocked by the finding of the test excavation, that the remains found the period of the home, and not just the remains that were found alongside that period. So the state was definitely embarrassed by that, and of course there was a lot of attention. Will that garner now again all that's happened, all the various atrocities that are happening throughout the world? I don't know, but I do know that we need the opportunity to be on the international stage challenging what our government is happening, because it's not just the equivalent of Roderick O'Gorman or children or whoever that's going to be there. It's actually the Secretary General of the department, the senior executives, the ones who oftentimes secure the narrative in the way that they want it rolled out. Talk about interdepartmental committees, for instance. In redress, you had the Attorney General's office there, but you also had the state money board, the state agency that provides financial redress. So really it was completely every participant was from the state boards. There was absolutely no voice from a human rights perspective, from a survivor, from civil liberties, from an international agency. There was no overseer, and that was a recipe for disaster. So that's why they do it time and again. Like, they don't learn. They knew that the redress scheme, by it being taken to and challenged on 8 different grounds in a court of law by judicial review. They knew they had failed, and they knew why they had failed. And yet they come along now and again have a dictatorial type of stance to survivors. This is what we imagine. And we've gone so far with it. That's the problem. It's not just going forward. It's the fact that so much is done behind the scenes before they come forward to us, and then we're expected. And of course, we're hopeful. You know, people say to me that, you know, I'm negative towards it. I'm not. You know, I don't want to be negative, but I want to be honest. And there's very little honesty around government as to how they have dealt with survivors of institutional abuse for decades. I mean, since 1999. And unfortunately, it has taken many good voices like Mary Raftery, who first exposed. We are walking in the footsteps of literally giants who were there before us, absolutely banging a drum and telling the government how they could do this properly. They haven't learned. They won't learn by us telling them. And unfortunately, I think justice will be a long time coming, if at all, because they are continuously denying justice. But it will be interesting to see who is appointed to the role to oversee it now as Minister for Children. Will it be a female, a male? Will there be a party person, or will they be an independent? Or, well, there won't be an independent unless it's an independent that's in government with them. You know, it's difficult to know. But either way, we will still be there holding them to account, and hopefully with the opposition. I mean, there's some wonderful speakers in Shannon as well. Alice Mary Higgins absolutely goes through the legislation brilliantly. Tom Cloonan is fantastic on behalf of children with disabilities, scoliosis treatments, and people with disabilities generally. There are so many. Paul Gavin has talked many times from Sinn Féin for us, Gerard Crockwell questions. So, you know, it's an important house as well for us to get answers. But time and again, we sit back, we're watching Oireachtas TV, and the minister waffles, counting the time until he can sit down again. And, some people who are very good, like Catherine Connolly, have very limited time. So, yeah, we will certainly advance this through as much as we can, also go further, and we'll also try and engage the documentary makers, press, overseas, because here we're at the mercy of many of the, and they want you, as I said, and then when it's over, they can close the book on it, but like our people can't. It's 24/7, 365 days of the year, maybe for 90 years of their life, and not knowing everything being taken from you, and no acknowledgement, absolutely no acknowledgement that you even went through a mother and baby home. Yeah.
Sure. You're on mute, Roisin.
I'm trying to keep on mute. I
Yeah.
heard before, if you keep on mute, the internet doesn't go. But Breeda, we're definitely going to keep the floodlights here at the Irish Political Roundup and on Confident Women Ireland on this.
Yeah, as I said, justice. Right.
Yes, Paul, and so we're definitely going to do that. And we started off the year talking about women and children with the referendums, and we're ending it very appropriately on the mother and baby homes and mothers and women and children. And we're definitely going to actually from January on keep talking about this. And Breeda, if there's anything we can do get in touch with us, and let's even get people on to talk about this, even survivors and even people who are
Exactly.
This is about lives.
Yeah, I think it's important to get survivors and to hear from them what they would like to happen now. You know, some of our survivors, in fact, many from Tuam are getting their redress. And while they acknowledge the 24,000 and many more who will not get redress and feel saddened about that, they have waited many, many years. And so I think, you know, their time to accept that redress is possibly now, even though they have to sign a waiver that they will not take the state to court or look for any further monies. And that is wrong too. That's against their rights. But yeah, I do think that their voices are so very important, even as they come to terms with the fact that the government are saying this is what we're giving and we are now closing the book. And to a certain extent, they are too, because many people, we have lost so many people recently. We've lost people, they're in their 80s. And, you know, their early life has been so difficult that even to live to that age is, you know, is a miracle in itself. So many of them are not in a position to actually speak. But the younger ones, the ones who are excluded, and certainly James Sugru will speak to you. I'm absolutely sure he will. And I will ask James to talk to you from the experience of being repatriated, if you call it that, back to Ireland. Although he was born in the UK, and his boarding out, which was absolutely horrific, and that of his family members, his brothers, and his quest for justice, and the fact that he will never accept, although he qualifies for minimal redress, he will never accept that until he sees that the government acknowledge truly what happened to him. So he would really be a good candidate for the new year to speak.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
forthright.
Let's do that. We give our word.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We give our word, and you know,
It's definitely,
Yeah.
radio.
I think, Paul.
yeah, I think definitely Breeda from talking to you, and it's absolutely been a huge education talking to you this evening. I think the old saying, uh, justice delayed is justice denied, and yourself and all the other survivors from the Tuam mother baby homes and the Magdalene Laundries, they deserve justice now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nobody can wait, you see, Paul. That's the thing. Nobody knows what tomorrow brings for any of us. And if, like our David, who died not knowing, at least he knew who he was. And his one wish prior to his death was that he would reclaim his mother's surname. And I tried to get that. And that should be a pretty easy ask. There was no cost attributed to it. And we had done the DNA and the genealogy ourselves. So again, there was no cost. We weren't looking for monies. And that was not forthcoming. So I think, you know, that's a denial to a point. It's a denial to a man who had waited all his life for 88 years. And you can imagine, you know, his wedding day, he had nobody at any of the wonderful events. His children had no aunts or uncles on his side. He had no grandparents. They had no grandparents. It's all of those stories. And, you know, when a child sits in your lap and says, Granddad, tell me about your early life or whatever, you know, they're 8 years of age, they're doing a project for school, a little project, and they're just asking you questions, and to not be able to answer those, you know, and to be reminded again that really to this state, you do not matter. And that has been the problem, is that the state has continuously, and Micheál Martin is responsible for this, as is Eamon Ryan, as is Simon Harris, Leo Varadkar, everybody that has come to date that has denied these children justice regardless of whether it was 10 years after they left or they are responsible. So we can Fianna Fáil, Catholic Church, GlaxoSmithKline, and anybody involved in the incarceration of children, mothers, elderly people. Some were there for life. And that was one of the remarks made to a journalist in the 1950s, Halliday Sutherland, and it was made by the Reverend Mother from the Magdalene Laundry in Galway when he asked how long do they stay, and she remarked, some stay for life. And how true that was when I found their records and found to my horror that they were registered in 2013. Some of these women who had died between 1922 and 1954, and yet not even their age was down on their death cert, not what they died from, nothing in relation to them, probably deceased on one, minus one for age on all, about approximately 30 deaths. And that is unforgivable, registered in this state in 2013. Absolutely, it is against any sort of Catholic Christian ethos that you would deny the women who were working and whose names appear on a headstone, but for whom there are no records. And these records that do exist were brought to the state in 2013 and accepted in that manner. Because if I went tomorrow morning to register a death from 1954 and had no details whatsoever, I'm sure I would have to answer for it. So there are many, many injustices. I mean, it is just soul destroying. You wonder how long I mean, I'm awake at night because I think, what can I do next to highlight? And there's much more atrocities that haven't come out yet that really I can't speak about, but I'm writing about. And we really need to, I think, grasp the nettle and ensure that justice follows, because we don't want to leave it to another generation to fight this fight for us. We want to do it now. So absolutely any exposure is welcome.
Well, Breeda, thank you so much. I'm really sorry my internet was kept going in and out and in and out. My apologies. But we give you our word, and we give this because we
give our word. We will continue to highlight this.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for taking over.
No problem.
We cannot go through the next government with dignity or moral political integrity until we make right of the past. We have to make right the wrongs.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Work together.
And we look forward to January 25. Imagine saying we look forward to 2025 to talk about this issue. But you know what? We'll put the floodlights the best we can, and anything we can do, Breeda, we will definitely do.
Thank you.
Breeda Murphy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Paul and me and myself tonight on the Irish Political Roundup.
Thank you.
Thank you, Breeda.
Bye now.